The rain wasn't just falling, it was an assault on the city, washing the streets with a cold fury. Inside the modest sedan, however, the air was warm. Dr. Alana Hayes was humming softly to a lullaby on the radio, her eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror where her 7-year-old daughter, Maya, was fast asleep in her car seat, her angelic face illuminated by the passing streetlights. It was a perfect moment, a tiny portrait of peace in the middle of an urban storm. But perfection is fragile. The flashing red and blue lights that erupted in her mirror shattered it into a million pieces. Her heart seized, an involuntary reaction that millions of Black Americans know all too well. What had she done wrong? Speeding? A busted taillight? She pulled to the curb, her hands trembling as she killed the radio, the sudden silence heavier than the rain. The officer stepped out of his patrol car, his figure tall and menacing in her headlights. His face, as he approached her window, was a hard, emotionless mask. He didn't say, "Good evening." He didn't ask for her license and registration. He said just one thing, his tone a cold, sharp command. "Get out of the car." And that's when Alana Hayes' world, her daughter's world, and the world we all thought we knew, began to come apart. Because 60 seconds later, after the deafening crack of a gunshot echoed into the rainy night, a phone rang in a place very, very far away. Not a police phone, not a reporter's phone. It was an encrypted phone in a high-security office at the Pentagon, and the United States Army started calling. Wherever you are in the world, whether it's the middle of the day or the dead of night, let me know what city you're in and what time it is right now in the comments below. Because the story I'm about to tell you will erase all concepts of time and distance. Stay until the very end, because the truth behind that call from the Army will shatter everything you thought you knew about justice, power, and the price of a single life. What happened next wasn't just an investigation, it was a secret war. Get out of the car. The command hung in the humid air. Alana turned off the ignition, her hands still shaking. "Officer, my daughter is asleep in the back. May I ask what I did wrong?" Her voice was a study in practiced calm, one forged over years of navigating quiet prejudices. The officer, his name tag read Miller, tapped sharply on her window with his nightstick. "I said get out of the car, now." A cold dread slithered up Alana's spine. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was something else. She slowly opened the door, the cold rain immediately soaking her blouse. "Please, don't wake her," she whispered. Miller ignored her. He pulled her from the car, his strength brutal and unnecessary. "Hands on your head," he barked, though she had made no move to resist. Alana complied, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel his eyes on her, scanning her not as a citizen, but as a threat. "You're scaring me, officer." "Shut up." He pushed her toward the rear of the car. It was then that Maya, woken by the shouting, began to cry in the back seat. "Mommy!" Her daughter's voice cut through the rain. On pure instinct, Alana turned her head. "It's okay, sweetie, Mommy's right here." It was a tiny movement, a maternal reflex, but in the eyes of a tense, racist cop, it was something else. To Officer Miller, it was defiance. It was resistance. He yelled something incoherent, and then Alana heard a metallic click. She didn't have time to process it. A hot, searing pain tore through her shoulder, and the world dissolved into a chaos of blinding light and her own scream. She collapsed onto the wet asphalt, the rain and her tears mixing on her cheeks. Maya's cries were the last thing she heard before everything faded. Exactly 1 minute later, 1,600 miles to the east, in a windowless room known as the Vault, deep inside the Pentagon, a dedicated phone shrieked with a tone that only a handful of people had ever heard. 4-star General Marcus Thorne, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, answered on the first ring. "Thorne." The voice on the other end was clipped and urgent. "General, we have a Chimera event, Priority Alpha. The core asset has been compromised." "I repeat, the core asset is compromised." General Thorne shot to his feet. his face becoming as hard as granite. Chimera was not a normal code name. It was the single most important, most secret U.S. defense project of the 21st century, and core asset could only mean one person. He looked at the massive digital map on the wall where a red dot was blinking in an anonymous Midwestern city. Location, he demanded, his voice sharp as a razor. Traffic stop gone wrong, General. Local PD. Shots fired. Asset is en route to the hospital. Thorne didn't need to ask more. He knew who the asset was. Dr. Alana Hayes, the one woman on the planet who held the key to the next generation of biological warfare and regenerative medicine. The woman who had just been shot by a local cop. Deploy the rapid response team. Get the Secretary of Defense on the line and get me a direct patch to the head of the FBI, he commanded. I want the name of that officer. I want to know everything about him. I want to know what he had for breakfast, and I want it 5 minutes ago. He slammed the phone down, the silence in the vault now deafening. The wars overseas could wait. A new war had just started right here at home, and the United States Army was not going to lose. In the harsh, artificial light of the emergency room, Alana's world was a symphony of pain and panic. Nurses and doctors moved around her with controlled urgency, their voices muffled by the constant beeping of machines. Gunshot wound, right shoulder, entry, no exit. BP is dropping, someone said. But all Alana could focus on was the single question repeating in her mind. Where is Maya? Where is my daughter? She tried to speak, but only a moan escaped. A kind face leaned close to hers. You're safe now, Dr. Hayes. Your daughter is with a social worker. She's safe. The words were a lifeline in an ocean of chaos. She closed her eyes, exhausted. Outside the trauma bay, another drama was unfolding. 2 police officers, Miller's colleagues, stood guard, their faces grim and defensive. They were building their narrative, the blue wall of silence going up brick by brick. She was non-compliant, one of them said to a supervisor over the phone. Made a sudden move. Miller felt his life was in danger. It's a justifiable shooting. Justifiable. The word sounded obscene in the hospital corridor, a brazen attempt to sanitize a senseless act of violence. They didn't know it yet, but their every word was being monitored. At that same moment, a few miles away, an unmarked private jet touched down on a reserved airstrip at the city airport. The door opened and a woman stepped out. Colonel Eva Rostova did not look like a typical military officer. She wore a perfectly tailored business suit, her hair was in a neat bun, and her eyes had a sharpness that could cut steel. She was General Thorne's best investigator, a legend in the military intelligence community. Her team, a small group of forensic experts, intelligence analysts, and clandestine operators, had fanned out across the city before her plane had even touched the ground. Rostova climbed into a waiting black SUV. "Report," she said, foregoing any greeting. The driver, a Special Forces major, handed her a tablet. Officer Daniel Miller, 42 years old, 15 years on the force. 37 excessive force complaints, 22 of them involving minorities. 4 suspensions, 0 indictments. His online forum activity is filled with hate speech and conspiracy theories. He's a textbook racist cop, Colonel. Rostova scanned the file, her face impassive. Body cam? Suffered a technical malfunction right before the shooting. Convenient, the driver replied with a hint of sarcasm. Dashcam, too. Of course it did, Rostova murmured. They're playing the old playbook, but they don't know who they're playing against. She looked out the window, the rain streaking across the glass. Our first priority is securing the asset. The hospital is under our control. Delta team is in sniper overwatch positions around the perimeter. No one gets in or out without us knowing. Priority 2? The driver asked. Rostova turned to him, a cold glint in her eye. We dismantle this police department's narrative piece by piece. We are not just investigating a shooting, we are investigating a threat to national security. This local PD just made a very big mistake. They poked a bear they didn't even know existed. Start with witnesses. There had to be witnesses. Find them before the cops do. The military's investigation had begun, operating in the shadows with precision and limitless resources. Meanwhile, at the city police precinct, Police Chief Jennings, a tired man, was rubbing his temples. The police union was already there, their lawyers circling Officer Miller like vultures. The story was already being solidified. An aggressive woman, a frightened officer, a tragedy but justifiable. Jennings knew better. He'd seen Miller's file. He knew Miller was a ticking time bomb, but the blue wall was thick. He had no idea that an even bigger, much stronger wall was silently encircling his city. 2 investigations, one public and flawed, one secret and unstoppable, were now on a collision course. And at the center of it all, Alana Hayes was fighting for her life, completely unaware that she had become the epicenter of a showdown that would reshape the future. Officer Daniel Miller sat in a clean interview room, but not as a suspect. He was with his union lawyer, sipping a coffee brought to him by a fellow officer. He was not in handcuffs. He was being debriefed, a term used to soften the gravity of the situation. Outwardly, he projected the image of a shaken man, an officer who had to make a split-second decision to save his own life. But inside, a fire of self-righteousness was smoldering. He'd been through this before. He knew the system. "Walk me through it again, Dan," the lawyer said, his voice gentle. "Every detail." Miller cleared his throat. "I pulled her over for swerving. When I approached, she seemed agitated. I asked her to step out of the vehicle for my safety. She was reluctant. Then, once she was out, she became aggressive. The kid in the car started screaming, and she made a sudden turn, her hand coming toward me. I didn't know if she had a weapon. I couldn't take that chance. I followed my training. I neutralized the threat." Every word was carefully chosen, a script rehearsed time and again in union halls and informal training sessions. Sudden movement. Feared for my life. Followed my training. They were magic phrases, talismans designed to deflect accountability. Chief Jennings watched the debrief through a one-way mirror, a sour feeling growing in his stomach. He knew it was a lie, or at least a version of the truth so twisted it was unrecognizable. He knew Alana Hayes wasn't a threat. A quick background check had revealed her to be a respected cardiothoracic surgeon, no criminal record, a pillar of the community. But Jennings also knew that to challenge Miller's story would be political and professional suicide. The union would turn on him. His own officers would turn on him. The entire machine would grind him down. The blue wall of silence wasn't just a code of conduct. It was a fortress. "His story is solid," Miller's captain said, standing beside Jennings. "No body cam, no witnesses have come forward. It's his word against an agitated suspect's." "She wasn't a suspect until he made her one," Jennings said quietly, but there was no force in his voice. He was trapped. Meanwhile, Colonel Rostova's team was operating with a completely different set of rules. They didn't care about police department politics or union power. They cared only about the truth. In a hotel room converted into a temporary command center, a young analyst pointed to his screen. "Colonel, I've got something. No body cam, but we have the GPS data from Miller's patrol car. The data shows he was following Dr. Hayes' vehicle for 6 blocks before he even hit the lights. There's no report of swerving. He targeted her." Another analyst spoke up. "And there's more. We've accessed the traffic camera from an intersection 3 blocks prior. The quality is poor, but it's enough. Dr. Hayes' car is traveling perfectly straight in her lane. Miller's car is right behind her. The swerving narrative is a fabrication." Rostova nodded, her expression unchanged. "Good. That's the first brick. Next, the witness." "That's tougher," a third agent said. "The police canvassed the area, but their report says no one saw anything. Most people had their windows shut because of the rain." "Most," Rostova repeated, stressing the word. They weren't looking for a witness. They were looking for confirmation that there were No witnesses. There's a difference. Ping every cell signal in a 2-block radius at the time of the shooting. Cross-reference with resident lists. Find anyone who might have been near a window. I don't care if they only heard the shot. Talk to everyone. Her team went to work, fingers flying across keyboards, algorithms running in silence. They were ghosts in the machine, collecting data the police department didn't even know existed. They weren't bound by the normal rules of procedure. To them, this wasn't a civil rights issue. It was an intelligence-gathering operation against a threat. The blue wall might be strong against pressure from within and from the public, but it had never faced anything like this. It was a medieval fortress facing a drone strike. They couldn't see their enemy, but their enemy could see every crack in their walls, and Colonel Rostova was about to start exploiting them one by one. Alana woke to the quiet of a private hospital room. The pain in her shoulder was a dull, persistent ache, but it was managed. Her first thought was still of Maya. A nurse, seeing she was awake, came in with a warm smile. "Your daughter is here, doctor. She's in the family lounge with a sitter. She's eaten and is watching cartoons. She's a very brave little girl." Relief washed over Alana, so powerful it almost brought her to tears. But then the reality of the situation crashed back in. She had been shot by a police officer for no reason. The door opened and a man in an expensive suit walked in, followed by the woman Alana now recognized as Colonel Rostova. "Dr. Hayes," the man said, his tone formal. "I'm the Secretary of Defense. I'm so sorry we have to meet under these circumstances." Alana blinked, confused. The Secretary of Defense? Here, in her hospital room? I don't understand," she stammered. The secretary pulled a chair close to the bed. "Dr. Hayes, what happened to you was a crime, and we are treating it with the utmost seriousness. But there's an aspect to this that you need to be aware of." He glanced at Rostova, who gave a subtle nod. "Officer Miller didn't just shoot a citizen. He shot the single most critical asset to the national security of the United States. He jeopardized Project Chimera." The name sent a chill down Alana's spine, a coldness that had nothing to do with her injury. Project Chimera. It was her life's work, a secret she had carried for nearly a decade. It had started when she was a brilliant surgical resident at Johns Hopkins. The military, through DARPA, had approached her. They had seen her potential not just to fix the body, but to regenerate it. They gave her unlimited resources, a state-of-the-art lab hidden deep within a military installation. And there, she had created something that bordered on magic. Project Chimera was a 2-part system. Part 1 was a biogel filled with programmed stem cells. When injected into a catastrophic wound, it could regenerate tissue, muscle, and even nerves at an astonishing rate. It could stop a hemorrhage in seconds, heal a 3rd-degree burn in days. It was a revolution in battlefield medicine. But Part 2 was Alana's true genius. It was a microscopic neural interface, a chip smaller than a grain of rice, implanted in the surgeon's brain. This chip allowed the surgeon to control microscopic surgical robots remotely with nanometer precision. A surgeon in Washington, D.C. could perform a complex heart surgery on a soldier in Afghanistan in real time. The combination of the two, the regenerative gel and the remote robotic surgery, was Chimera. It had the potential to make battlefield mortality a thing of the past. It was a strategic advantage so massive it was incalculable. And there was only one problem. The neural interface was so complex, so delicate, that it could only be linked to a single brain's architecture. It was calibrated, coded, and integrated with the unique neural pathways of one person, Dr. Alana Hayes. She wasn't just its creator, she was the living key. Without her, the multi-billion-dollar system was just a pile of useless metal and gel. "He didn't know," Alana whispered, the shock overwhelming her. "The officer, he couldn't have known." "No, he didn't," the secretary agreed. "He was just a bigot with a gun and a badge. But ignorance does not mitigate the damage. Your shoulder, Dr. Hayes. The doctors say there's nerve damage. We need to know, is the interface still viable? The question hung in the air. Her injury was no longer just a personal trauma. It had global implications. Rostova stepped forward. Dr. Hayes, we are going to get you justice. I promise you that. My team will not rest until Officer Miller and anyone who covered for him is held accountable. But we also must protect the project. That means we need your cooperation. We need you to focus on healing. We will handle the rest. Alana looked from the Secretary of Defense to Colonel Rostova. She had thought that night was about racism, about police brutality, and it was. But it was now so much bigger. Her shooting wasn't just an act of hate. It was an accidental act of geopolitical warfare. Her fight for personal justice was now tied to the security of the nation. She was no longer just a victim. She was a battleground. And she knew she had to fight, not just for herself and her daughter, but for the secret she held. The news of the shooting spread like wildfire. At first it was a local story, woman shot by police during traffic stop. But the identity of the woman changed everything. Prominent surgeon shot by police. The national news outlets seized on it. Satellite trucks parked outside the hospital. Reporters mobbed the police precinct, shouting questions at Chief Jennings whenever he appeared. The story became an instant symbol for the ongoing debate in America. On one side, you had a successful black professional, a mother, a pillar of the community. On the other, a police department with a history of force complaints and an officer with a troubled record. Protests began to form, small at first, then growing larger. People of all races and backgrounds gathered in the city square carrying signs that read, "Justice for Alana" and "End police violence." They chanted her name, turning it into a rallying cry. On cable news, the pundits screamed at each other. "This is a clear-cut example of systemic racism," one argued. "We shouldn't rush to judgment," another countered. "We need to wait for all the facts. Police officers have to make split-second decisions." Officer Miller's narrative, skillfully fed by his union lawyers, went viral. He was painted as a victim, a public servant forced to act in self-defense against an uncooperative and increasingly aggressive individual. They ignored her profession. They ignored the fact that her child was in the car. They painted a picture of a heroic cop and a dangerous woman. It was an old and often effective tactic: blame the victim. Alana's family, flying in from across the country, had to navigate this media storm. Her brother, a prominent civil rights attorney, became the family's public face. "My sister is a healer," he said at an emotional press conference, his voice trembling with rage. "She has spent her entire life saving people, and she was shot by the very person meant to protect her. Don't talk to me about split-second decisions. Talk to me about split-second prejudice. This was not a mistake. This was the predictable outcome of a broken system." While this public storm raged, a tense silence enveloped the military world. General Thorne and the Secretary of Defense watched the news with growing anxiety. Every mention of the prominent surgeon made them cringe, as it was perilously close to the much more dangerous truth. They launched a quiet disinformation campaign of their own, leaking small stories to trusted journalists about Alana working on an unspecified government health project, a way to explain their interest without revealing Chimera. But it was a dangerous game. Colonel Rostova, shielded from the media chaos, continued her work. The public attention was both a help and a hindrance. It put pressure on the police department, making a complete cover-up more difficult. But it also scared potential witnesses who didn't want to be dragged into a national circus. Still, her team persisted. They found her, a college student who lived in a third-floor apartment overlooking the scene. The girl had initially told the police she hadn't seen anything, but Rostova's team wasn't the police. Rostova's agent, a young woman with a gentle demeanor, approached the student not with a notebook and a badge, but with an offer of help and understanding. "We know you're scared," the agent said, "but we are not the local police. We just want the truth." After an hour, the story came out. The student had seen the whole thing from her window. She saw Alana get out of the car, hands raised. She saw Officer Miller shove Alana. She heard the child's cry, and she saw Alana turn her head, not as an act of aggression, but as a mother's reflex. She had seen Miller draw his weapon and shoot an unarmed, non-threatening woman. "I recorded it," the student whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "On my phone. I was so scared." She handed over the phone. On it was a grainy video, partially obscured by the rain, but unmistakable. It showed exactly what the student had described. It shattered Officer Miller's lie into 1,000 pieces. Rostova, watching the video in her temporary command center, didn't smile. She just nodded. "All right," she said. "Now we have him. It's time to talk to Chief Jennings, not as investigators, but as the people holding all the cards." Police Chief Jennings thought he was going to a meeting with a liaison from the Department of Defense. He expected a polite conversation about ensuring security at the hospital where an important government employee was being treated. He was not prepared for what was about to happen. The meeting wasn't in a drab government office, but in a plush conference room in a downtown hotel. When Jennings walked in, he saw more than one person. Colonel Eva Rostova sat at the head of the table, her expression cold and commanding. She was flanked by two men in suits who exuded a formidable confidence Jennings usually only saw in high-level federal agents. There were no handshakes. "Chief Jennings," Rostova began, her voice sharp, "thank you for coming. We won't take much of your time." She motioned to one of the men who placed a tablet on the table and turned it to face Jennings. The screen showed a map of the city with a red line following a blue line for 6 blocks. "This is the GPS data from Officer Miller's vehicle and Dr. Hayes' cell phone on the night of the shooting," Rostova said. "It shows Officer Miller stalking Dr. Hayes for no apparent reason, directly contradicting his statement about erratic driving." Jennings stared at the screen, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. "I wasn't aware of this." "You are now," Rostova cut him off. "Next." The second man swiped the screen. An audio file began to play. It was a harsh, low-quality recording, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Officer Miller speaking on an anonymous police forum online a few weeks earlier. "These people are taking over our city," Miller's voice said, thick with hatred. "They drive nicer cars than us, live in better houses. Someone needs to put them back in their place." The audio ended. The silence in the room was heavy. "We have hours of recordings like this," Rostova said, "establishing a clear pattern of racial bias, a motive." Jennings's face was ashen. "This is inadmissible material. We have resources you cannot possibly imagine, Chief," Rostova said, her tone still terrifyingly calm. "And finally," she said, "the main course." The first man swiped the screen again. A video began to play, the grainy, rain-streaked footage from the student's phone. But it was clear enough. It showed Alana standing still, her hands up. It showed Miller shoving her. It showed her turning her head toward her daughter's cry. And it showed Miller drawing his weapon and shooting her. There was no hesitation, no clear threat, just violence. Jennings felt the air leave his lungs. The blue wall had crumbled. The fortress had been breached. All the lies, all the cover-ups were useless in the face of this cold, irrefutable evidence. "Who are you people?" he whispered, finally understanding he wasn't dealing with a regular liaison. Rostova leaned forward for the first time, letting a flicker of emotion show in her eyes. An ice-cold fire. "Who we are is not important, Chief. What is important is that Dr. Alana Hayes is not just a private citizen. She is a national asset of the highest possible importance. Your Officer Miller didn't just commit a civil rights violation. He committed what could be construed as an act of domestic terrorism against the United States government." Jennings flinched. Domestic terrorism. The words carried a weight that could crush his entire department. "So, what do you want?" he asked, his voice weak. "This is what is going to happen," Rostova said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Within the hour, you will suspend Officer Miller without pay. Pending criminal investigation, you will issue a public statement admitting serious inconsistencies in the initial report. You will formally request that the Department of Justice open a federal investigation into your department, and you will turn over every file, every report, every document related to this case and Officer Miller's record to us, unredacted, without delay. The union will, Jennings started. You let me worry about the union, Rostova cut in. Your choice is simple, Chief. You either cooperate, and you might just save what's left of your career and your department from total collapse, or you fight us, and I assure you, the Department of Defense will bring its full weight to bear to dismantle your organization from the top down. We will treat this as a national security investigation, and we will treat you and your officers as hostile subjects. The choice is yours. Jennings looked at Rostova's granite face, then at the video still playing on the tablet, a silent loop of brutality. He knew he was beaten. He knew the blue wall he had relied on his whole life was nothing but a paper screen against the coming storm. I'll make the call, he said, in the voice of a defeated man. While the wheels of justice, greased by an invisible hand, began to turn, Alana Hayes was starting a war of her own. A war fought not with evidence and confrontations, but with will and resilience. The first days after the surgery were a blur of pain, physical therapy, and nightmares. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the headlights, Officer Miller's enraged face, and heard Maya's cries. The wound in her shoulder was a constant reminder, but the wound in her soul was far deeper. Alana, however, was not one to break easily. She was a surgeon. She had spent her life fighting disease and death. She had looked at seemingly hopeless situations and found a path to victory. Now she had to apply that skill to herself. The physical therapy was agonizing. Simple movements like lifting a glass of water were a challenge. The nerves in her shoulder were damaged, and the doctors were unsure if she would ever regain the fine motor control necessary for her surgical work. Every painful twinge in her muscles was a reminder of what had been taken from her, but every time she wanted to give up, she thought of Maya. She thought of her daughter's small face looking at her from the back of the police car after they took her away. She thought of that shattered innocence, and then she would grit her teeth and push harder. One afternoon, Colonel Rostova came to visit her, this time alone. She brought a laptop. "I think you should see this," Rostova said quietly. She played Alana the video from the student's phone. Alana watched it in silence, her face unreadable as she witnessed the horrific moment again from a new perspective. When the video ended, she didn't cry. Instead, a cold calm settled over her. "So that's it," she said. "No confusion, no fearing for his life, just hate." "Yes," Rostova confirmed, "and we're going to make him pay for it." Alana looked out the window, her gaze distant. "My brother wants me to sue. He wants a civil trial, millions of dollars. He wants justice that way." "That is your right," Rostova said. Alana shook her head slowly. "Money can't heal this, and putting one man in jail, it's important, but it's not enough. He's just a symptom. The disease is the system that created him, protected him, and allowed him to do this for years with impunity." She turned back to Rostova, and for the first time since the shooting, Rostova saw the fire in Alana's eyes, the fire of a scientist, an innovator, a fighter. "I want to do more," Alana said, her voice filled with resolve. "I want to get back to work." Rostova was surprised. "Doctor, you need time to heal." "The best healing for me is work," Alana countered. "Project Chimera, it was designed to save people, right? To heal wounds that seem impossible. I've been thinking about it. I've lived it. I can make it better. The nerve damage. I have new ideas, new protocols for stimulating regeneration. I can use my own experience to push this technology far beyond what we imagined." She gestured to her shoulder. "This isn't just a wound anymore. It's a laboratory, and I'm test subject number 1. Rostova stared at the woman in the hospital bed. She had seen bravery on the battlefield. She had seen soldiers overcome horrific injuries. But this was something else. This wasn't just survival, it was transformation. Alana was taking the worst kind of violence and hatred and turning it into fuel for creation and hope. She was refusing to be a victim and was becoming a pioneer instead. "We will give you everything you need," Rostova said, her voice filled with respect. "A lab right here in the hospital if necessary. Your team will be flown in. Anything." "Good," Alana said, a faint but determined smile on her lips. "Because Officer Miller tried to end my story that night, but he failed. He has no idea that he just started a whole new chapter." In that hospital room, an unlikely alliance was forged, not between a military officer and an asset, but between two powerful women determined to change the world. One by breaking a corrupt system, the other by building a better future from her own broken pieces. Officer Miller had shot a woman, but he had awakened a giant. While Alana found new strength and Rostova tightened her net, a quiet crisis of conscience was unfolding inside the city police department. A young officer named Mike Kowalski had joined the force with high ideals. He wanted to help people, to make a difference. But 5 years on the job had eroded those ideals, replacing them with a weary cynicism. He had seen too many compromises, too many shortcuts, too many instances of us looking out for us. The shooting of Dr. Hayes was the final straw. Kowalski had been at the precinct that night. He'd heard the whispers, the off-color jokes. He had seen the way senior officers and union reps immediately circled the wagons around Miller, not to find the truth, but to build a defensive narrative. He had heard the term, "a good shoot," uttered before Alana's body had even hit the operating table. It made him sick. He knew Miller. Everyone knew Miller. They knew he was a racist, a bully with a badge. He was a problem waiting to happen, but the machine protected him time and again because he was one of us. The pressure from outside was mounting. Chief Jennings's statement admitting inconsistencies sent a shockwave through the department. Officers felt betrayed, but Kowalski felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this time it would be different. Then the order came down from on high. "Clean up Miller's file." It wasn't a written order, of course. It was a nod, a wink in the locker room. "Make sure everything is squared away." Kowalski, as a junior officer, was assigned the task of reviewing Miller's old incident reports. His sergeant said it was to prepare for the federal investigation, but Kowalski knew what it really meant. Find and scrub anything else that could be damaging. As he went through the dusty files, he found it. A report from 3 years prior. Miller had arrested a black teenager for loitering. The teen had filed an excessive force complaint, claiming Miller had slammed his head against the patrol car, but there was something odd in the file. Miller's report claimed his dash cam had been malfunctioning, but Kowalski, who had a good memory for technical details, remembered that particular car was part of a new pilot program with a supposedly fail-proof camera system. On a hunch, he went into the digital archives. He searched by the car number and the date. He had to dig deep, bypassing several layers of restricted access. But he finally found it, mislabeled and buried in an unrelated folder, a video file. He hit play. The video was crystal clear. It showed Miller taunting the teenager using racist slurs. It showed the teen offering no resistance. And it showed Miller deliberately and maliciously slamming the boy's head against the car door. Then, the video showed Miller looking directly at the camera, realizing it was on, and cursing before reaching out and shutting it off. It was the smoking gun, not just proof that Miller was a violent racist cop, but proof that he had lied on official reports and that someone in the department had helped him bury the evidence. Kowalski sat there, his heart pounding. He had two choices. He could delete the video, follow the unspoken order, and live with the shame. Or he could do the right thing and risk his career being branded a rat and possibly even his own safety. He thought about why he'd joined the force. He thought about Dr. Hayes and her daughter. He took a flash drive out of his pocket. With a trembling hand, he copied the file. That night, he drove to a coffee shop on the other side of town. He used a public computer and an anonymous email account he'd created. He had seen Colonel Rostova's name in the news, vaguely described as a DOD observer. He found a generic email address for the Pentagon's Public Liaison Office. He attached the video file and wrote a short, simple message. Proof of Miller cover-up. Car 114. John Doe arrest April 12, 2021. Find the original report. It was changed. He hit send and felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a new kind of fear. He didn't know if it would get to the right person. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he couldn't be a part of the silence anymore. He had chosen a side. He had become a whistleblower, an unlikely savior in a war he never wanted to be a part of. In Rostova's temporary command center, the anonymous email arrived like a whisper in a hurricane of data, but their systems were designed to catch such whispers. An analyst flagged it within minutes. "Colonel, I think we might have a friend on the inside," he said. Rostova watched the video. Her face remained impassive, but there was a cold satisfaction in her eyes. This video wasn't just another piece of evidence. It was the key. It showed not only Miller's actions, but it proved a systemic cover-up. It elevated the case from the prosecution of one bad officer to the prosecution of a conspiracy. "Cross-reference it," she commanded. "Pull the original incident report Jennings gave us and compare it to the metadata on this video. Find the discrepancies. I want a legal brief on the potential federal charges. Conspiracy, obstruction of justice, perjury. I want everything." Her team worked through the night, fueled by coffee and adrenaline. They found it, the original report, buried deep in a backup server, which showed Miller had initially admitted to a struggle. That report had been deleted and replaced with a sanitized version. The digital signature on the replacement report belonged to one man, Lieutenant David Thorne, Miller's direct supervisor and a powerful figure in the police union. The next morning, Rostova didn't make a call. She took a meeting. This time, it wasn't with Jennings. She went straight to the office of the U.S. Attorney for the district. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Maria Flores, had been following the case in the news. She had been expecting to get a file from the FBI someday. She was not expecting Colonel Eva Rostova of the United States Army to walk into her office, flanked by two JAG lawyers. Rostova placed a briefcase on Flores's desk and opened it. Inside was a thick, meticulously organized binder. "Ms. Flores," Rostova began, "what you have here is a case in a box. We have irrefutable evidence that Officer Daniel Miller shot Dr. Alana Hayes without cause, motivated by racial prejudice. We have video evidence, GPS evidence, and eyewitness testimony." She pushed a second binder across the desk. "And here you have proof of a criminal conspiracy to cover up that crime, involving at least one other senior officer. We have evidence of evidence tampering, perjury on official reports, and obstruction of justice." Flores flipped through the documents, her eyes widening with every page. This wasn't a normal case file. This was a case that had been investigated with the resources and precision of a military intelligence agency. "Colonel, this is extraordinary," Flores said. "But why the Department of Defense? What's your interest?" "Our interest is national security," Rostova replied flatly. "Dr. Hayes is a government employee working on a critical project. That's all you need to know. The Department of Justice has been briefed at the highest levels. You will have the full backing of the federal government." Rostova stood up. "We've done our part. We have handed you an unwinnable case. Now it's up to you to deliver justice. We expect arrest warrants to be issued by the end of the day, not just for Miller, but for Lieutenant Thorne as well." The hammer had fallen. That afternoon, FBI agents, not local police, arrived at Daniel Miller's home and arrested him. They also went to the police precinct and put Lieutenant Thorne in handcuffs at his desk, in full view of his stunned subordinates. The news of the federal arrests sent a seismic shock through the nation. The blue wall of silence had been breached. The police union screamed about federal overreach, but their words now sounded hollow and desperate. The game had changed. At the hospital, Alana watched the news on the TV in her room. She saw Miller's face, no longer arrogant but filled with fear as he was led away in handcuffs. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel triumph. She just felt a profound, heavy relief, as if a weight she didn't know she was carrying had been lifted. Her brother and Maya were by her side. Maya, too young to understand everything, just knew that the bad man was being taken away. She hugged her mother. "Are you going to be okay, Mommy?" Maya asked. Alana kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'm going to be okay, sweetie. I'm going to be stronger than before, and we're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." She looked up at the TV, where a legal expert was talking about the far-reaching implications of the case. This was just the beginning. The legal battle would be long and hard, but for the first time it seemed like justice wasn't just a distant possibility. It was within reach. And Alana, with her daughter in her arms and a world-changing project on her mind, was ready to seize it. 6 months later, the federal courtroom was packed. The trial of Daniel Miller for civil rights violations and Lieutenant Thorne for obstruction of justice had become a national event. It was a trial not just of two men, but of a system. Alana Hayes walked into the courtroom, her right shoulder still a little stiff, but her gait confident. She was not the trembling victim on a gurney anymore. She was a witness, a scientist, a survivor. She took the stand, faced the jury, and looked directly at Miller. His eyes darted away from hers. The prosecutor, Maria Flores, began her questioning. Her voice was calm and methodical as she walked Alana through the events of that night. Alana told her story with clarity and precision, without hyperbole, without unnecessary drama. She described her fear, her confusion, and the terror of realizing what was happening. But Miller's defense attorney, a slick man paid for by the police union, tried to attack her. "Dr. Hayes," he began, his tone dripping with skepticism, "you say you were afraid. Is it possible that your fear caused you to act erratically? Is it possible you failed to follow the lawful commands of a police officer?" Alana looked him squarely in the eye. "I followed every command until I was violently pulled from my vehicle. My fear was not an admission of guilt. It was the rational response of an unarmed black woman being stopped at night by an aggressive police officer. It is a fear that has been etched into our cultural DNA." The courtroom was silent. The defense attorney, thrown off balance, tried another tactic. "And your work for the government, Dr. Hayes. It's quite secret, isn't it? You can't tell us what you do, can you?" He was trying to imply she had something to hide, that she might be a security risk. It was a mistake. Flora stood to object, but Alana waved her down. She turned to the jury. "My work is classified, but I can tell you this. I have spent the last 10 years of my life developing technology to save lives. Soldiers, civilians, people who have been catastrophically injured. My sole purpose is to heal. The irony is not lost on me that a person who has dedicated her life to putting human bodies back together was so senselessly broken by someone sworn to protect them." Her testimony was powerful, but it was Rostova's evidence that hammered the final nails in the coffin. The student's video was played on a large screen, causing a collective gasp in the courtroom. The video from the police archives showing Miller assaulting a teenager destroyed any doubt about his character. The military's experts testified about the GPS data, the hateful social media posts, the digital cover-up. They built a wall of evidence so high and so solid that the defense team couldn't chip a single stone from it. They tried. They called other officers to testify to Miller's good character. They argued the videos didn't show the full context, but their lies were laid bare. When Daniel Miller took the stand in his own defense, his story crumbled under Flores's cross-examination. He became flustered, contradicted himself, and in the end, he looked exactly like what he was, a frightened bully, stripped of his power and the protection of his system. After 3 weeks, the jury went to deliberate. The nation waited. Alana didn't wait in the courthouse. She was in a temporary lab the military had set up for her, working on the complex equations that would redefine the limits of Project Chimera. She had found her peace not in retribution, but in creation. It took only 4 hours. The jury returned. Alana stood in the courtroom with her brother as the foreperson rose. On the charge of violating the civil rights of Dr. Alana Hayes, we, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Miller. A long pause. Guilty. A wave of hushed gasps swept the room. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant, David Thorne, guilty. Justice had been served. Cameras turned to Alana. She didn't cry or smile. She just gave a single solemn nod. This wasn't a victory to be celebrated. It was a painful acknowledgement of a wrong being righted. The battle was won, but the war remained. And Alana knew that her work, both in the lab and in the world, was just beginning. The verdict sent shockwaves across the country. Daniel Miller was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Lieutenant Thorne received a 7-year sentence. The city police department was placed under a federal consent decree, forced into massive reforms under the supervision of the Department of Justice. Chief Jennings resigned in disgrace. It was hailed as a landmark victory for police accountability. Alana Hayes' name became synonymous with resilience and justice. She was flooded with interview requests, book deals, movie offers. She turned them all down. She didn't want to be a celebrity. She wanted to be a scientist. She returned to her work with a renewed focus. Her injury became her inspiration. Using the insights she gained from her own recovery, she made breakthroughs in Project Chimera's neural interface. She developed a new way to teach the system to adapt to nerve trauma, essentially allowing it to repair and reroute its own connections. It was a breakthrough that would have been impossible without her traumatic experience. A year after the trial, she stood in the vault at the Pentagon with General Thorne and the Secretary of Defense. On a massive screen, they watched a live feed from a field hospital in a distant conflict zone. A soldier was brought in, grievously wounded by an IED, his leg seemingly beyond saving, but then a medic injected the Chimera gel. The bleeding stopped almost instantly. Then, from thousands of miles away, Alana, wearing a specialized headset, controlled the microscopic surgical robots. Her own fingers didn't move, but on the screen, tiny robotic arms worked with superhuman precision, mending severed blood vessels and nerves. A few weeks later, that soldier wasn't just alive, he was walking. Alana had turned the weapon of hate into the ultimate tool of healing. She had taken the worst of humanity and used it to create the best. "Your legacy, Dr. Hayes," General Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's going to save countless lives." Alana nodded. That was always the goal, but she knew her legacy had to be bigger than that. She established the Alana Hayes Foundation for Justice and Innovation. Using a portion of her government funding and private donations, the foundation had 2 goals: to fund breakthrough medical technologies in underserved communities, and to support programs aimed at improving police-community relations, with a focus on de-escalation and anti-bias training. She became a frequent speaker, not to news outlets but at police academies and universities. She told her story not to condemn, but to educate. "Power isn't in the weapon you carry," she told a class of police recruits. "It's in the empathy you show. Real strength is the ability to see the humanity in another person, even in the most stressful moments. That's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. I hope you won't have to." Her story changed laws in several states. Alana's law was passed, mandating an automatic independent review for any officer who accumulated more than a certain number of use-of-force complaints. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. The shooting of Dr. Alana Hayes began as a tragic story of racism and violence, but it ended as a story of redemption, not just for one woman, but for the potential of a nation to confront its own demons and strive to be better. Alana never forgot that rainy night. The scar on her shoulder was a permanent reminder, but it was no longer a symbol of pain. It was a symbol of strength, a reminder that even from the deepest wounds, something new and powerful could grow. Years passed. Officer Miller's name faded into obscurity, a footnote in criminal history. Alana Hayes' name, in contrast, was written into history books, not just for her case, but for her contributions to science and humanity. Project Chimera, partially declassified, revolutionized emergency medicine. Her foundation changed thousands of lives. Her daughter, Maya, grew into a brilliant and compassionate young woman studying law with dream of becoming a civil rights prosecutor. She grew up in a world where her mother's story was a cautionary tale, but also a beacon of hope. Every now and then, Alana would get a letter or an email from a young police officer somewhere in the country who had heard her speak or read her story. They would tell her that she had inspired them to be a different kind of officer, to challenge the status quo, to remember the human being behind the badge. Those messages to her meant more than any scientific award. The fight against racism and injustice never truly ends. It's a constant struggle, a perpetual state of vigilance. There were days when she read the news of another incident, another name, another broken family, that she felt a profound weariness. But then she would look at her scar, look at her work, look at her daughter, and she would find the strength to continue. This story began with a single act of violence, a moment of hate in the rain, but it became something so much bigger. It was a testament to the idea that one person can make a difference, that systems can be challenged, that even in the darkest of times, the light of science, reason, and compassion can illuminate a path forward. It showed that sometimes to defeat the monsters, you don't need a gun. You need a microscope, a brilliant mind, and a heart that refuses to be broken. That call from the United States Army that night wasn't just to save an asset. It was a wake-up call for a nation, a reminder that the most precious asset any country has is not its weapons or its secrets, but its people, and the promise that all of them will be treated with dignity and justice. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If these stories of resilience, justice, and the fight against inequity mean something to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we explore next. Together, we make a space for the voices that need to be heard. Justice won in the courtroom that day. But never, ever forget one cold, hard truth. The system that created Officer Miller didn't die in that courtroom. It just went home to train his replacement.